Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera.
Yo soy un hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Yo soy un hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Y antes de morir yo quiero echar mis versos del alma. Y antes de morir yo quiero echar mis versos del alma.
Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera, Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera.
No me pongan en lo oscuro a morir como un traidor. No me pongan en lo oscuro a morir como un traidor. Yo soy bueno y como bueno moriré de cara al sol. Yo soy bueno y como bueno moriré de cara al sol.
Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera, Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera.
Con los pobres de la tierra quiero yo mi suerte echar. Con los pobres de la tierra quiero yo mi suerte echar. El arroyo de la sierra me complace más que el mar. El arroyo de la sierra me complace más que el mar.
Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera, Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera.
Tiene el leopardo un abrigo en su monte seco y pardo. Tiene el leopardo un abrigo en su monte seco y pardo. Yo tengo más que el leopardo porque tengo un buen amigo.
Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera, Guantanamera, Guajira Guantanamera.
Dilo, compadre.
Good morning, guys. It's almost 10:30 on the 2nd of September 2020, and we're pretty close to it being the first day of spring here now. Bud burst on the nectarine tree that's at my front door, which is pretty much the beginning of spring. And we've just had 2 or 3 weeks of the last terrible weather of winter, which is why this video is a little bit late. I just haven't had any good weather to get out and do some filming, and we're in the process of moving the studio from the small little studio that we have now to a larger, more usable workspace. So this is podcast number 44, and I've titled it Alter Diagram 1. Okay, so before we actually start discussing this first altar diagram in detail, we need a little bit of background about the grade system in the Golden Dawn. So the Golden Dawn grade system is based upon, the pattern for it is based upon the diagram of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. And if you don't know what that is, you probably really need to go right back to the early podcasts I made on this channel which talk about the Kabbalah. But the Kabbalistic Tree of Life is composed of 10 or in a manner 11 spheres arranged in a very recognizable geometric pattern. And this diagram is used to explain all kinds of things in the Kabbalah in reference to the diagram. But most importantly, the diagram is used to explain the system of the ascent of spirit into physical reality down through the 10 spheres, and which are called basically the 10 emanations of the Supreme Being. And it's also used to explain the ascent from physical reality back up to spirit of the human consciousness, or what we might call spiritual self-development, the stages of spiritual self-development. So there's a downward descent through 10 stages, and there's an upward ascent through 10 stages. And this ascent concept is intimately connected with the idea of spiritual self-development, and therefore Hermetic initiation and Kabbalistic initiation. So organizations like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn are known to use this diagram as a way of discussing, presenting, describing their grade initiation system. So when you go into a school like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, there are a number of grades, and each grade has some instruction. Each grade begins with a group initiation ritual where a group of officers initiate or advance a candidate, and in those rituals a whole bunch of information about that grade level or that sphere on the Tree of Life is presented to you in a kind of symbolic and dramatic form in order to explain the story, not only of that level but of the whole of the position of that level in the overall system. So the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn has kind of a bit of a strange numbering system for its degrees. Outside of the tree, below the tree, they add a extra sphere, and they call it the neophyte degree, and its number is 0 equals 0. So a neophyte is a person who's basically applied for training, has been accepted, and they go through their first degree ritual. And there is a bunch of information that's then presented to them, and they're kind of like on the porch of the temple, approaching in order to enter and begin training. And that training proper begins in the next degree, which is represented by or symbolized by Malkuth on the Tree of Life. That degree is known as the Zelator degree, and the number it's given is 1 equals 10. And what that number means is the first degree of Zelator, 1, has a kind of equivalence to the last degree, which is the number 10 degree. So they number all their degrees in this manner. 1 equals 10 is the first degree. The second degree is 2 equals 9, and that's at Yeshod on the Tree of Life. And the third degree is called 3 equals 8. So as you're climbing up the tree, 3, 4, 5, the equivalences are also coming down at the same time, and they meet at the central Sapphira, which is called 5 equals 6, and it's Adeptus Minor. Now, in the original system of the Golden Dawn, the very first design of that system, there was only the 0 equals 0 degree, Neophyte, the 1 equals 10 degree of Zelator, the 2 equals 9 degree of Theoricus, the 3 equals 8 degree of Practicus, the 4 equals 7 degree of Philosophus. And then there was a bridging degree between what's known as the outer order, which is those first 4 degrees, plus the Neophyte degree. But a bridging degree between that outer order and what's known as the inner order, which is the 5 equals 6 degree of Adeptus Minor. So it's the first adept degree, and it's the beginning of the inner order. And so they put a bridging degree between the outer order and the inner order called the portal degree, and it doesn't have a number. So later, the higher levels on the tree, the 6th, the 7th, 8th and 9th Sapphira, Sephiroth, were also given rituals and teachings, but in the original system it only went up to the 5 equals 6 degree, and that's all we're going to discuss here, because that's all that is important to talk about when considering the altar diagrams. So the 0 equals 0 degree does not have an altar diagram, and neither does the first degree called the Zelator 1 equals 10. So the first altar diagram that you're presented with as a candidate who's working his or her way up through the degrees is at 2 equals 9 Theoricus. But I'm going to refer to this, for the sake of simplicity, as the first altar diagram. And this is what it looks like. Now, each temple has their own, like, slightly personalized version of these altar diagrams. In the original Golden Dawn temples, they would have found somebody who had artistic skill, particularly in painting. They would have given them the basic rough outline drawing of what the altar diagrams look like, and then that person would have painted them on a nice board, and they would have put a border on it, maybe glass or whatever. And so each temple had slightly different looking, but they all explained and showed the same symbolism and the same underlying story. And the story that the first altar diagram presents us with is that of the basic view of the Kabbalistic tree of life, looked at as a plan of the progress a candidate initiated into Hermetic personal self-development takes. So it's the first diagram is basically saying the tree of life is a pattern or a plan and a description of the journey of the soul through the process of Hermetic spiritual self-development. And the way that this is explained is, we can see the basic pattern of the tree of life on the diagram, and the spheres are numbered, or sometimes they have the grade numbering system on the spheres. And then there are two other important symbols on the tree. The first important symbol is a zigzag fiery sword, and the grip or handle of the sword is up above the top sphere of the tree, Keta, and then the blade of the sword zigzags down the tree and comes out below the bottom sphere on the tree, which is Malkuth. And there are a couple of important ideas that are encapsulated in the symbol of the sword. The flaming sword symbol harkens back to the story in Genesis where Adam and Eve were booted out of the Garden of Eden, and that God put cherubim at the gate to Eden with flaming sword in their hand in order to bar the way to the tree of life. And that flaming sword is a symbol which represents the zigzag pattern on the tree of life. And this zigzag pattern, we can see, descends down from above and reaches the physical world. But it also represents the path of ascent back to spirit. And when we are walking that path as an initiate, the way we connect with each sphere, each initiatory experience on the way back up the tree, is that we go to each sphere in order, in the same order that that flaming sword delineates that zigzag pattern down the tree. And in some traditions and in some schools of Hermetic Kabbalah, this is called the path of the lightning flash, and it's the most immediate and least complicated path of return back to spirit for somebody who's walking the path of initiation and spiritual and advancement through spiritual self-development. So you can see where the bottom of the sword sticks out at Malkuth. It then goes up to Yeshod, it then goes across to Hod, then across to Netzach, and so on up the tree. And that is the grade system in the Golden Dawn. When they number the spheres 1, 2, 3, 4 as you're going from the bottom up, that numbering system follows that zigzagging sword. And so that's what that sword means, and that's what you're taught about the symbolism of the sword. And the idea or the symbol that the sword represents some kind of a barrier to returning to Eden, which is the most exalted spiritual state of being for a human being. This lightning flash is placed at the gate to the Garden of Eden, or in front of the threshold to the Temple of Wisdom, because it represents a requirement by God and therefore nature for you to ascend all those spheres in an orderly fashion back to the top. You can't just go from Malkuth to Ketha and miss out everything between, or pick and choose which spheres to go to and how quickly you're going to race through them. And a proper, orderly ascent from the bottom, physical reality, to the top, the ultimate summit of spiritual achievement, is an orderly ascent done in stages or grades, as the Hermetic training schools would call it, grades or degrees of ascent. So that's what that sword represents. It's a system of training that keeps out anybody from spiritual reality who doesn't follow that system. And that system is used in every form of initiation, in any culture or belief system or spiritual belief system in every country in the world. but they have their own versions of teaching and expressing that system. But nevertheless, everybody on the path of return must follow those stages, and if you don't, that ignorance of the stages or avoidance of them bars you or bans you from entering into spiritual reality fully and properly. So that's what the sword on the tree means, and we can squash all of that together in a very basic summation and say that the sword represents the order of the numbers on the spheres and the grade system in the Golden Dawn: first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, all the way back to the top. The second symbol that's superimposed on the Tree of Life, as we can see, is a snake, and the snake's tail is down near Malkuth, and the snake's head is sticking up by Kether. And instead of touching the Sapphira or the Sephiroth on the Tree of Life like the flaming sword does, the snake winds its way over the what's called the paths on the Tree of Life, and they are the lines that join each Sephiroth to the others near it. And so those lines that connect the Sephiroth are known as the paths of the Tree of Life. There are 22 of them, and as you ascend up through the grades or Sephiroth on the tree in that orderly zigzagging pattern, each time you get to a Sephiroth, it has a number of paths connecting to it, and each of those paths speak of an experience that you have at that sphere or grade or degree, which has an impact on your spiritual growth. So the snake shows that there is an orderly touching or walking into or experiencing of those paths and the archetypal concepts on the paths. And we can see there is a numbering system there, the lowest path being the 32nd, and then the next twist of the snake goes up to the 31st, and then the 30th path, and so on, so on, so on, so on, up the tree until you get to the 11th path, which is connected to Kether and is the passage from Chokmah, the second to last sphere, to Kether, the last sphere. So there's two dimensions to the initiatory experience. There is the zigzag of climbing up the tree in an orderly fashion by going to each Sapphira, and there are also the paths on the tree which connect the spheres and which represent experiences that you have when you're at each sphere. And each of these experiences, it is said, must be impressed upon your psyche and your soul as you ascend the tree in order to maintain a proper balanced outlook on the initiatory process and a proper understanding of the nature of reality as you ascend up through its various stages towards the summit of spiritual experience. So as a candidate for initiation and advancement in a Golden Dawn temple, when you're actually at the physical temple going through a physical degree with the officers, and in the temple is all the symbolism around you of the Sapphira you're leaving and the one you're approaching and the paths that connect them. Most of the information that's given to you during those rituals as the candidate is information explaining the nature of the sphere that you're on, the grade or degree that you're taking, and the paths that and the experiences and the paths that connect that sphere. So I'm not going to repeat the information for the 2 = 9 degree here. It's a bit redundant because that information is online for free if you want to look for it, or you can buy a copy of Israel Regardie's book, The Complete Golden Dawn, or the Golden Dawn Encyclopedia as it was once called, which has copies of all the grade degrees in it and shows you how the temples are set up, and you can read those for yourself to elaborate on the key points that I'm providing here in this series of podcasts. My biggest concern in discussing these altar diagrams is to tell you the information that isn't provided in the ritual ceremony and that isn't provided in what's called the knowledge lecture for each grade or degree that you take. So each grade or degree has got a little wee lecture of usually no more than half a dozen or 8 pages, which you have to study and you have to memorize all the information in it. This is in the original system, because modern systems have changed and elaborated on this quite a bit. But you would be given a knowledge lecture, and all the information that's provided in that knowledge lecture is somehow related to the education that you're getting through the ceremonial degree that you're taking at that time. So all of that stuff is in Regardie's book, The Complete Golden Dawn, or the Golden Dawn Encyclopedia, and you can look that up yourself by buying a copy of the book or by Googling online and searching for the information yourself. The important thing is what's not being told to you in the system. And the assumption was, in the original Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, that as you take your degree, as you're leaving one training level and moving towards the next training level, the very first thing that always happens is, okay, you've completed 1 = 10, so now you're eligible to take your 2 = 9 training. So what the temple will then do is book you into a meeting night at the temple when the ritual team are doing degrees, and then they will work the next degree for you. So that's the first thing that happens to you as you're entering a new degree. And that ritual contains, in a kind of compressed form, all the knowledge and symbolism that you have to learn as a candidate for that degree. But if you look at the knowledge that's provided in the degree and in the knowledge lecture, it isn't a hell of a lot of information. And if you have no previous experience with studying Hermetism, a lot of that information will probably go right over your head, and you don't know even what you're really supposed to do with that information. But what was originally required while the degree has been done and completed and you've got your knowledge lecture is that you're assigned a teacher, and that teacher is supposed to have an advanced understanding of the entire Golden Dawn teaching and degree system, and you're supposed to have conversations with that teacher where he fills you in on all of the periphery information. But most of the time that never happens these days, because most of the tutors in the Golden Dawn system have no idea about the periphery system, or the head of the tuition groups, the guy who's telling all the tutors how to behave and what to teach, he isn't aware of the periphery information, so no one's given permission to teach all that voluminous information that actually is part of each degree system. And a big chunk of that information and instruction and explanation that is missing is the explanation of what these altar diagrams are. So I digress, and I better get back to making the point about the 2 = 9 altar diagram. So it's assumed in the old original Golden Dawn that when you saw that first altar diagram in the 2 = 9 degree, the chances are that a lot of the candidates would have never seen a copy of the Tree of Life before, the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. So that's the first thing they're doing. look, this is the Kabbalistic tree of life. It's got 10 spheres on it, there's a bunch of paths that all join it together, and it has 2 other important symbols. A lightning flash or flaming sword that zigzags down the tree from the top to the bottom, and a serpent which ascends the tree and touches each of the paths between the spheres in a numeric order all the way to the top. And what they're saying by presenting the tree in this way, because it's a type of tree of life diagram that you don't really see anywhere outside of the Golden Dawn, is they're saying when you see the tree of life, when you're studying it, when you're thinking about it, when you're contemplating and meditating upon the diagram itself in order to extract deeper understanding out of it, the first thing you should always have in your mind is that the tree of life diagram was originally created and handed down through time as a way of explaining the blueprint of initiation, the process of initiation and advancement through the degrees or grades of spiritual self-development. So it may not seem like a huge revelation to some people that the tree of life diagram at the core of the Kabbalistic system, and it from the most ancient beginnings of the Kabbalistic system, that the tree of life diagram, more than anything else, is supposed to be a diagram representing the plan for spiritual self-development within the Kabbalistic and Hermetic training scheme. It may not seem like a big deal to be saying that to a lot of people, but the reality is, and I know this from a lot of experience, that a lot of people who decide that they want to be involved in Hermetic study, and a lot of people who get involved with a Hermetic school that teaches initiation, provides training in spiritual self-development, a lot of them don't know very much at all about Kabbalah in general, and a lot of them know very little about what the tree of life is and what it's supposed to mean. And many of those new students, neophytes and aspirants, have only read the cheapest and most superficial books on Kabbalah that don't really make a big deal of the things that should be most obvious about Kabbalah and the tree of life. That's the first thing. A lot of people don't know a lot about the tree of life and the Hebrew Kabbalah who come to Hermetic training. I've had guys who have got deeply into advanced training in the school that I oversee, who still have the most remedial grasp of what the Kabbalah is and what it's supposed to teach. The second thing is that back in the day, when the Golden Dawn was first created, put together as a training system, same story happened back then. Most people that came to that school for spiritual training had very little or no understanding of Kabbalah at all. So at the 2 = 9 level, with the very first altar diagram, the very most basic things had to be said to the candidate. Look here, this is a picture of the tree of life. It's a diagram with 10 spheres on it that are numbered in a particular order, and that this diagram represents the plan and blueprint for the process of the initiatory or spiritual self-development journey. One of the reasons why a lot of people don't know this very basic information is, first of all, because they've never studied the Golden Dawn system at all or properly. And the Golden Dawn system is pretty much one of the very few schools in the West that emphasize this thing about the tree of life. Most other people who get involved in the Western Hermetic tradition are interested in the magical side or theurgic or thaumaturgic side of Hermetism. And so they usually, in their own self-guided study, tend to focus on information about the Tree of Life which describes and elaborates upon the machinery of Western Hermetic magic. So another aspect of the Tree of Life is that it's used to put all the phenomena in reality into like little filing cabinets, so that we can see the relationships between those phenomena, the magical connections between them, and the ways of affecting things with magic from one place to things that are in another place. Most people who study magic and Hermetism are only interested in that kind of information. They're usually not really interested in actual initiation for spiritual self-development. They're only interested in initiation for the sake of learning about the mechanics of magic. So the whole initiation side, even though they will read information about it and come and bump into, rub shoulders with that information in various books and various sources of discussion, they'll bump into that information relatively regularly. They generally ignore it because it's not what they are immediately interested in, and they don't really care about assimilating an understanding of spiritual self-development and how initiation is connected with that. So today, as well as back in the early time of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, one of the things that it's important to say is that apart from all the other stuff that the Kabbalistic Tree of Life has been used to teach in the Hermetic tradition, as well as in Orthodox esoteric Judaism, but that's not an interest of ours here. We're talking about the Hermetic tradition here and how Kabbalah was absorbed into the Hermetic tradition and then evolved and developed for more of a Western and more of a Christianized and sort of non-secular view of esoteric culture. So the first thing that is important to know is not only that the tree represents the path of ascent and kind of is explaining to us the clockwork mechanism of initiation, because initiation is an orderly process with specific stages and different things happening at each stage. But the Golden Dawn went one step further and said there are two other important aspects, and these are details of that path of return, and they are that we must ascend back up through the tree in an orderly zigzagging pattern, and we must have a specific number, 22 in fact, of experiences on that path of ascent in order to properly absorb and integrate the whole spiritual journey properly. So the 2 equals 9 diagram is setting the scene for what's going to be shown in the altar diagrams for the next couple of ritual degrees. We now know that in the next degrees, when we see the diagram of the Tree of Life again, that the first thing we're going to be connecting with that is that this is a discussion about the pattern or blueprint or instruction for the process of initiation. I keep repeating this, and I know it sounds very simple and to a lot of people very obvious, but there is one hard fact about these altar diagrams, And that is, everybody who has read Regardie's book, The Complete Golden Dawn, and everybody who has actually gone through the temple degrees in a physical temple has seen these altar diagrams. But in the whole history of the Golden Dawn system, I've never seen, I mean, there could be a rare book out there, but I've never seen a published discussion in detail of what these altar diagrams mean. And that's very strange, because all the claims that are made about the Golden Dawn system, all the things that Golden Dawn followers appreciate about that system, all come back to the knowledge that's presented in these altar diagrams, because they're the blueprint. It's the same as when you're building a house, planning to build a house, and you go to an architect and say, these are the ideas that we have for the house that we want, this is where the land is, the property is, and we want you to draw up the plans for the house. So the architect draws up the plans, they are finalised and confirmed with the buyers, and then the plans are handed over to the builders. Every time the builders go to carry out another step in the construction plan, the first thing they always do is go back to the blueprint. What does the blueprint say? How many bolts and nuts do we need? How long should those pieces of timber be? How big should the footprint of the building be? Where does the plumbing go? Where does the electric go? So on and so forth. It's the same in the Golden Dawn system. When you want to know what you're going through, what you should be doing, what you should be experiencing at each of those stages of ascent back up through the tree of life, what you should be doing is going back and referring to those altar diagrams and saying, okay, where am I at now? Here's the plan. Have I got all the pieces in the right place? Am I understanding what is going on here, or what is supposed to be going on here? And is there anything missing that may collapse the house in the end if it isn't included in the building plan? The fact that nobody before me, it seems, has made a big deal about these altar diagrams, has attracted attention even to them and said, look at this stuff, it's important, or has written a book on the subject delineating all the information that is encapsulated in these altar diagrams. The fact that it hasn't happened is very unusual. But one important thing about the lack of discussion and understanding of these diagrams is that it says a lot about why the Golden Dawn system today is not functioning properly. It says a lot about why the Golden Dawn system is not functioning properly. Because the people in positions of authority in Golden Dawn temples are not properly educated. And they also are not properly experienced, and they haven't gone through the right stages of self-development themselves. So they don't know the importance of the Golden Dawn diagrams and the plan that those diagrams explain, and therefore they don't pass on that information to the next generation of students that are coming in. And then what you have is a whole temple full of people who are really very ignorant of what it is that they're there for and what they're supposed to be doing. And because the people at the top of the system are not doing their job properly, and it's not necessarily their fault, it could be just that because they were never taught, they just don't know or don't understand. But because they're not teaching the system properly, it's important not to attract people's attention to what the old diagrams really mean and the kind of illumination that you can get from studying them, Because if you figure out what they are as an advancing student and realise that they are the blueprint and come to understand that blueprint yourself, one of the first things that you're going to realise is that the people in front of you and the people in positions of authority in your temple are not what they claim to be, and they're not doing their job properly, and you're not being treated as an advancing candidate. You're not being treated properly. You're not being delivered the proper, effective initiatory system. If you understand the altar diagrams, you can look at any training system that you get into and know whether or not they are delivering what they claim to be delivering, which is initiation into the Hermetic mysteries and effective techniques for spiritual self-development. So this is the journey that we are on when we're discussing these altar diagrams in this and in the coming podcast series until we complete the last altar diagram, which is at 5=6 level. The next two are probably the most important diagrams, and they give an enormous amount of detail about the psychological side of the initiation process and the fact that the psyche, that esoteric psychology, does play a major role in the process. So this podcast probably isn't going to end up being very long once I've edited it and uploaded it, because basically the 2=9 altar diagram is very basic. There's not an enormous lot to say about it. But I will keep repeating through each of the podcasts in the series a number of core ideas about why it is important to study and understand these diagrams. And I'll repeat these ideas because I know it takes a lot for people to get the importance of this situation into their head and then start doing something about it. If you consider yourself a serious Hermetist, or a serious Golden Dawner, or that you're serious about the Barden system of training, or you're trying to self-initiate yourself and you're doing it the whole eclectic thing, the information that is in these Golden Dawn altar diagrams is absolutely essential to every kind of person who's approaching the Hermetic tradition and wants to understand the keys of what initiation is supposed to be and what they should expect from the process. So I finally had to grab a few minutes this morning to make this podcast while the sun was shining, because even though we're close to spring now, like I said, the nectarine tree at my front door is just going through bud burst now, so winter is almost completely over here. There's still a bit of rough weather, windy, a bit rainy, and it was a cloudless sky this morning, and the clouds starting to close in, as you might be able to tell from the light in the video. And so we're not far away from it raining, and I can feel the odd spit of rain now. So it's a good idea to stop at this point and not elaborate too much more before we get on to the next diagram, which is the 3=8 diagram, and consider the very interesting information that that diagram encapsulates in its symbolism. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you as usual in the next podcast.
hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Yo soy un hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Y antes de morir yo quiero echar mis versos del alma. Y antes de morir yo quiero echar mis versos del alma.